I would like to begin with a little experiment. And for that, I would like you to close your eyes just briefly. Now, see if you can remember last night's dream. What happened? Who was in that dream? How did it make you feel? Okay, open your eyes again. Now, there's a pretty high probability that with a little information about you, I should be able to tell at least the basic plot of that dream. And I owe that to this man, Calvin Hall. In his lifetime, he archived more than 50,000 dreams. You are a man, there's a 75% chance that you dreamt of another man. You didn't know that man. Chances are even higher that this person presented a threat to you. Now, we commonly associate dreaming with creativity. Hall associated dreaming with the reproduction of our fears and prejudices, our mundane reality, in a way, in our resting minds. Now, I am not a cognitive scientist, and I am not a psychologist either, but much of my work is about helping leaders reflect and dream about the future. And what I learned is that the way we dream as individuals is in many ways quite similar to how we dream as societies. New ideas, brave ideas, collide and combine with existing fears and prejudices and imagined orders and real orders. So I would like to share with you some thoughts today about social dreaming and how we can liberate our imagination from this grip of reality. Now, nowhere do ideas and fears clash harder than when we think about future technologies. Who here in the room believes that we are living in an incredibly exciting time of technological progress? Okay, I'm glad. You're at the right meeting. Who of you thinks that the way we consume, the way we treat our environment, in fact, the way we grow, is really hitting a wall? Okay, many of you. So isn't that interesting? So we're living at the same time in an era of incredible promise, mainly driven by science and technology. And then we're also living in an era of depressing limits, mainly of the political and societal, economic, environmental sort. Now let's go a little bit deeper there. So on the one hand, life feels like the beta version of a science fiction dream. Humanoid robots, this is Hubo, by the way, he won the DARPA challenge, so he's really one of the better ones. They're still incredibly clumsy and slow, but they're beta versions of a time when machines leave the factory floor to come and live amongst us. And I'm sure that many of you here in the audience can think of other examples, all the way from synthetic biology to, say, quantum computing, and you will have many more examples. But then we're also living in this era of limits. Trust in business and the economy is generally very low. I mean, think of low growth, low investment, think of environmental difficulties, decay everywhere. And we also don't really trust our governments anymore, do we? I mean, if you think about rising inequality, if you think about decreasing levels of public safety. Now, what happens when our fears meet fantastic machines? Dreams turn into nightmares. Dreams turn into nightmares. So there are two very popular nightmare stories that we all read a lot about in the media. The first nightmare story is this one. It's the story of exploitation and inequality. We first got betrayed by our banks, then we get beaten by our machines, and then we get kicked out by their owners. This is the Tesla production floor, and you don't see a single human on this picture. The other story is the story of those who actually fared quite well with capitalism as it is going so far. It's the erosion of the familiar. It's the collapse of business, the collapse of industries, of markets, in some parts of the world, entire governments. Now, these stories are fairly different, and I can tell you it's very different people who tell those stories. But they have one thing in common. They portray progress as a problem. And we even have a fancy word for that: disruption. So the real problem, in my view at least, is not this proverbial struggle between man and machine that you read a lot about today in the newspapers. It is actually the struggle with our fear. And that fear is the toxic byproduct of declining trust in government and markets, and to some extent ourselves. Now, talking about the dark side. Who of you has seen, you can admit it, it's fine. Who of you has seen the latest Star Wars movie? Okay, it's a little bit more than half of you. And you're not alone. This movie made about $2 billion at the box office since it came out in December. Now, who of you remembers this colorful bunch here? Awesome. We're all techies here. Wonderful, I love it. The first one here came out in 1966. And the 1950s and 60s were an era, like a torment of technological change. It brought about everything, many things that we enjoy today, all the way from the birth control pill to the technology that put a man on the moon. It was a time when growth in the United States and in Europe exploded. Germany, my home country, experienced its Wirtschaftswunder. Japan became an industrial powerhouse. Other things happened. The United Nations were founded. Millions of people around the world won political independence. The civil rights movement was born. So this is the context against which this TV series emerged. But then in the early 1970s, things kind of turned sour. Unemployment went up, growth went down. People became much more aware of environmental catastrophe. And of course, specifically in the United States, Vietnam and Watergate spoiled the party. Well, and who showed up? This man. Right? It's a great tale of how reality is capturing our imagination. The colorful, flashy colors of the Star Trek crew and the dark colors of Darth Vader. Peaceful coexistence, at least when Captain James T. Kirk did his job, and an intergalactic civil war. Utopias turned into dystopias, dreams turned into nightmares. The point is that the way we think about the future is very much a mirror of how we're doing today. So how are we doing today? In the heady globalization era, the world was flat. It's a quip by Tom Friedman that many of you probably know. But how does the world feel today? It feels spiky, it feels dirty, and it feels risky. Right? This is how it is changing today. Now, this begs a very interesting question, an important question, in fact. How can we liberate our imagination from the grip of reality? How can we find opportunity in this perceived era of limits? Well, first of all, enjoy Star Wars. Those of you who have not yet. It's a good film. But don't trust anyone who's trying to predict the future. Maybe unless it is your local weatherman or your local weatherwoman. What's the main difference between your local weatherwoman and your favorite futurologist? It's twofold. First of all, she doesn't have an agenda, usually. And secondly, she does not need to take into account people. So flashback into the colorful 1960s. This picture here is taken from a performance called The Happy Plastic Family. It's part of a bigger musical called The Wonderful World of Chemistry, put on by DuPont at the 1964 New York World Fair. And this performance, along with other performances and exhibitions, just had one big message. American capitalism is going to bring about a marvelous future. At the same time, in Russia, President Khrushchev promised his people, this one is actually, it's quite cute. I like it much better than Hugo, the one I showed before. So President Khrushchev, he promised that the computers developed in his research labs would finally bring about socialist paradise. Now, this was, of course, the big battle of ideas in the Cold War years, but there's one major message in there. If someone talks to us about the future, he or she probably wants something from us today. There's usually an agenda in every prediction. The second point is about people. So fast forward into today's time, and let's look at some of the predictions that we're facing today. The first one is the following. As soon as everyone's connected, participatory democracy is going to be the order of the day. Well, but then what happened? The Arab Spring failed in most countries, sadly. The 99% movement disappeared as fast as it appeared in many countries. And then Edward Snowden came with a very important message. Everyone's been upgraded. Right? The point is that there's nothing in digital technology that's making us more or less free. Only people can do that. Here another prediction. Digital technology is going to turn every child's room into a startup garage. It's going to let startup entrepreneurship blossom. This is not entirely wrong, but then at the same time, many of these children's rooms actually moved into the offices of big tech firms. Well, there's nothing wrong with big tech firms per se, but the lesson's a different one. There's nothing in digital technology that necessarily makes or breaks monopolies, or corporate power, if you like. Only people can do that. And there's a third prediction, also very well known. Digital technology is going to set free our creative powers. It's going to liberate our creativity. Now, a lot of research shows that most of us here spend 80% of our time checking emails and sitting in pointless meetings. Well, who feels that this is the case? Okay, there's some happy ones. Find someone who didn't put up their hand and ask how they do it. Okay, so this brings me back to my original question. How can we liberate our imagination from the grip of reality? How can we find an opportunity or opportunities in this era of limits? Well, yes, don't predict. Be wary of agendas in predictions, and let's trust people. And then ask one little, very brief question. What if? What if? This is really question zero for much of my work. There's something incredibly powerful in connecting people's minds and hearts to circumstances, be they in the past, the present, or the future. Let me give you an example. What if information could be downloaded from the brain and used in the courtroom? What if algorithms replaced soldiers and generals taking decisions on the battleground? Kind of scary. Or maybe not scary. I don't know. And what if we could live for 150 years or forever? Look, all these questions are based in real science, but at the same time they're intentionally provocative, simplified, and of course future-oriented. The idea is not to predict the future, but to encourage people to suspend their disbelief, to let their minds wander. Those who predict try to narrow down our horizon. I believe reality already makes our horizon incredibly narrow. So my goal is to open up our horizon to different possible futures. Ultimately, of course, to have a conversation about what is the future that we prefer. Now, there's one thing that I learned over the past years. It is incredibly hard to ask people to suspend their disbelief. We are actually hardwired not to suspend our disbelief. And if you work with very successful people, they know that their belief actually got them where they are, so it's even harder to ask them to suspend their disbelief. That's why we, as a team, turn more and more to design to make the future more tangible. We're using virtual reality, we're using simulations, installations, and exhibitions. And just to give you a little example here, this is from an exhibition that we worked on together with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, in Davos, just a few weeks ago. It is a fully functional 3D printed gun. And it comes with the question, what if people could just download the blueprint from the internet and print that gun at home? Having this gun in front of you makes this question more tangible and more urgent. By the way, to be allowed to bring that gun into the Congress Center, we had to remove one piece. Otherwise, security wouldn't have allowed us to do that. Here, another example. This is a face mask created through a process called phenotyping. Basically, this means that you take a tiny little bit of DNA and you analyze it. And based on this DNA, you can reconstruct the physical appearance of a person. This technology is not entirely there yet. But it comes with the question, what if this tiny little piece of DNA that you left behind out there when you had a plastic cup and you drank a little bit of water, what if this tiny little bit of DNA could be used to reproduce you, either physically or digitally, right? Okay. Everyone looks a little bit scared. So let's end on a happier note here. This is a garment. It's from the same exhibition. It's augmented with solar cells, and it allows you already to charge your iPhone in less than 2 hours just by wearing it. And it comes with the question, well, what if our bodies could collect all the energy that we need? All these things are not made to predict the future. They're there to stimulate a dialogue about how can technology actually serve us better. And I'm convinced that we need much more of this kind of thinking to find opportunities in an era of limits brought about by economic constraints, environmental constraints, political constraints. And in this regard, the 1970s actually also offer some encouragement. Yes, it was the time when Star Wars came out in 1977. But in 1977, you also had this bunch here, Steve Jobs and Wozniak. They presented the Apple II. It's the first mass-produced, commercially viable microcomputer. In many ways, 1977 was also the year when the digital era started. So where many of us see limits, some see opportunities. Right? So next time someone talks to you about the future, just take a step back and ask, what if things were radically different? And next time someone comes and talks to us about limits, well, let's take on that challenge. Let's take on that challenge and seek the opportunity behind. Technology is not going to decide. Only we do. Thank you very much.